Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Debatable Discussions podcast. Today you join us for a very exciting episode as we delve into the many ideas and articulations of Noam Chomsky.
Noam Chomsky, former professor at MIT, now retired, who is incredibly well known for a couple of things. One is his work in linguistics as part of the founding of his universal grammar theory, as well as his political work, being a political activist associated with the New Left movement, and especially his opposition to the Vietnam War. Also, Chomsky has played a huge part in defending free speech, which has brought him some controversy, and also has been a vast critic of the US invasion of Iraq in 2003. So, John, my first question to you is,
Yes.
What does Chomsky believe is sort of our nature? What does Chomsky think makes us, almost?
So that is creativity. As you described there, Dan, Chomsky is one of the most prominent US philosophers, especially one of the most prominent US modern philosophers. And Chomsky's core idea around humanity is creativity. This is something I think he believes that animals don't have, or obviously plants, another form of life. They don't have this innate ability to be creative. And almost a higher level of consciousness one can deduce from that. He believes that that is what separates us as being superior beings. Yeah, what do you believe about Chomsky and his sort of definition of human nature there?
I agree with it, but I think we first need to define creativity in his sense of the word. Creativity for Chomsky is not sort of being Isaac Newton and discovering gravity. And, for Chomsky, creativity is as simple as the fact of reacting differently when you hear something. So, for example, when you're very young, reacting to language, as an example Chomsky always gives, is creative. We are creative in our responses when we talk to one another. Most of the time, we're not aware of what the other person is going to say, and we have to reply on the spot using that improvisation. But I agree with Chomsky because of a number of reasons. Number one, I think it's very difficult to pinpoint how animals, plants, bacteria, etc. would be able to have that creativity due to the fact that it's sort of more instinctually based. For us, it's quite easy, on the other hand, to point out, as I've said, us talking right now, we are creative because we don't have a script that just says every single word we need to say. However, there are some problems with his theory as well, which is, can we be sure that, for example, dogs aren't creative? How can we test that? I don't think we can. Also, there are other opposing views to what human nature actually is about. And another prominent philosopher, Michel Foucault, says that what human nature actually is this sort of amalgamation of power relations. What do you think about that? Who do you agree with more?
Yeah, I see where Foucault's coming from in that sense of the amalgamation of power relations, was it you said there?
Yes.
So I definitely see that argument. And actually, humans have a unique. If this is what Foucault knows, I'm not too sort of researched in this area, too informed in this area, but I'd imagine Foucault means that in just sort of power relations between humans in the sense of how we interact with one another. But I think in the natural kingdom, especially animals, interact with each other in a very unique, sometimes sophisticated manner. But the idea of Chomsky is one that I go back to in the sense of it appeals to this idea in me that what differentiates humans to animals is a more advanced level of consciousness and a more advanced, complex cognitive ability that we have. And at the forefront of that cognitive ability is creativity. And yes, that is what definitely appeals to me from Chomsky's theory. What do you think, Darren?
Yeah, I agree with you there. I think you've actually made a very good point there in the natural world. tribes exist, sort of packs of wolves do have power relations among them as well. It's not a uniquely human thing. Cognitive animals are able to display, frankly, some of the same behaviors that humans would in a tribe. So I think Foucault does have a point, though, that power relations, the way power relations are formed in humans, is probably different. And he makes point through schooling and medicine and other things that sort of make these power relations. But I don't think it's a uniquely human thing. I think some parts may be unique, but as you've said, a pack of wolves does have that power imbalance and does operate in a way analogous to humans. Whilst we can't really be sure that wolves are really creative because they sort of go on and do a repetitive set of tasks every day that's mostly instinctually based. Now, my second question to you is another point of Chomsky's, which is that also language, this capacity for language, and the difference of language also makes us different to animals because we're one species with different languages. So, what do you think about that? Do you think that's also part of what makes humans distinct?
So yes, I mean, as you mentioned there, Dan, Chomsky. When I think of Chomsky, I almost think of his greatest contribution, academia, is to this field of linguistics. Linguistics is what he was a professor of MIT, and it sort of rested on him on this universal grammar theory. And basically, he believed that humans have this innate capability for language. His assumptions rested on how, for example, babies can have, in his opinion, can just learn a language through pure immersion into it, like I'm sure we both did. And how he also made the point of how, isn't it bizarre how we have this innate capability for grammar, whether that is forming new languages. So all the languages in the world, even though they come from such different roots, they have this same sort of base structure of grammar. And he believes that is because of this innate human capability. Now, I think it's hard to say, are we unique because of language? Because I think the example people like to give is dolphins. I think dolphins, they can whistle and communicate through that.
Yeah.
And obviously that is highly sophisticated. However, I do think there is an argument to be made that this is evidential and the sort of the many means that human language can be communicated through, that we have a higher level of sophistication when it comes to language. Can you test it? Not really, because we can't understand what dolphins are saying. But it is fairly obvious that humans have this universally have this sophisticated ability for language. What do you think, Diane?
Yeah, I fully agree with you there. I think what's really interesting about this language theory of Chomsky's is not just necessarily the fact that we can speak languages, it's more that we are one species, Homo sapiens, that speak a variety of languages, which is unheard of really in the natural world because you have people and also speaking multiple languages as well. It's quite distinct, quite distinctly a human thing. People being able to speak 2, 3, or 4 languages. You're never going to find a wolf being able to speak the same as a dolphin, or a dolphin the same as a lion, or a lion the same as an owl, for example. But you will find people being able to speak all of these multiple languages, which is something that definitely makes us think. And here I want to introduce another idea, which is the fact that Chomsky believes that we're not a blank slate when we are born, unlike one of your favorite philosophers, John Locke.
Yeah.
How do you think Chomsky and Locke compare when it comes to sort of this blank slate approach?
So I'll say I can't really speak for Chomsky. I don't know what he says. But obviously Locke's idea is the tabula rasa. And there's something I almost find quite comforting with Locke when it comes to the tabula rasa, because this idea of tabula rasa is a blank slate. We are born, and let's say we are a blank slate. And then all of life's experiences sort of add to this canvas. and form and lead us to be the person which we are when we're older. So it's a very empiricist sort of way of thinking about growing up, one could say, because through experience, we form the person that we're going to become when we're older. And this is a fundamental idea of Locke. It implies, it's a sort of overarching thing in many of his theories. How does Chomsky differ, Dejan?
Well, Chomsky says that we're not a blank slate when we're born. We don't have this tabula rasa. We on the other hand, have this sort of built-in mechanism for grammar. We have this built-in mechanism for grammar that allows us then to learn a language, quite simply, as you said, by immersion. As most babies do. You're very young in your house and your parents talking to you, and somehow you speak the language without much sort of practice, without a dictionary, without anything really. It just happens. And that's why so a lot of people say, oh, I'm going to go to Italy for a year to learn Italian because it's so much quicker. And Chomsky takes that approach and says, you know what, in order for that to happen, we must have a built-in mechanism already that allows us to learn a language and grasp its grammar without spending needless hours going through it. I do agree with him there. I think Locke's argument might be more from a moral perspective, if I'm right. I think it's more of a moral thing, and Chomsky's is more a practical one.
Yeah, no, I agree with that, because as humans, we do have this capability to, let's say, if I could learn Chinese, I could start learning Chinese tomorrow. And we have this innate capability to potentially do that within a year.
Yeah.
And something so opposed to a language we know, we're just able to learn it. Why? It requires something more sophisticated than knowledge, I think, than pure knowledge. And that is what Chomsky appeals to. And so another landmark idea of Chomsky, as you mentioned at the start of the episode, is that Chomsky has been opposed to many wars, particularly wars and invasions led by the US, and he's become a prominent left-wing political figure for these views. So what makes something illegal? Chomsky sort of flirted with this idea throughout his time in academia.
Yeah. Well, for Chomsky, there are a couple of different notions of legality. Number one, he doesn't agree with the fact that if the US government says jaywalking is illegal, he doesn't really subscribe to that. Not necessarily jaywalking, but an example of that would be if you were to stop a train that was going to bring supplies that were then going to be sent to Vietnam for the war. That would be illegal in the eyes of the US government, but Chomsky doesn't agree with that. Chomsky says it's the same principle as if you were at a traffic light and there was a guy with a machine gun planning to shoot a bunch of people, you would run him over, and that would not be illegal. So Chomsky makes this distinction between legality in the eyes of the state and legality in the eyes of the individual. He claims that in order for something to be illegal, it must be morally wrong, it must be unjust, and it must have a sort of worse outcome. He doesn't just simply subscribe to the idea that jaywalking is illegal, therefore it is illegal. He says, no, jaywalking can be legal, in my opinion, for example, because there is no negative outcome. The only outcome, for example, is me being able to cross sooner, which is a morally right thing, for example.
Yes, I see. He's got a different idea of illegality, as you said there, Dejan. And I think part of this is how you view illegality. So obviously, the major analogy of Chomsky was that he did not believe it was illegal to block the trains going to Vietnam, didn't he? Obviously, because he was so opposed to this war. And I think you have to consider with him, he has a very absolutist sense, relativist sense in a way, actually, sorry, when it comes to what is illegal. And that relies almost upon his morals. He was morally opposed to the war in Vietnam. So he said, well, using this relativist judgment, I'm going to say, no, it's not illegal to block this because for me, it's pursuing a higher moral goal. So yes, it's obviously a slightly different definition to whether the law considers whether what he's doing as being illegal or not. And you also have to consider, as I previously mentioned, this idea of the action itself can be illegal, but does doing an illegal action mean there will be better consequences? For example...
Well, for Chomsky, no.
Is it no for Chomsky? Okay.
Well, no, because if there are better consequences, that would be a legal action in Chomsky's mind. So for Chomsky, illegal actions only result in poorer consequences.
Poorer consequences, yes. But I mean, the action itself, the absolute, if you look from it from a sort of duty sort of based idea, it could be illegal, but it wouldn't be illegal, as I was saying, if the consequences were better. You can forgive an action in his eyes. And that history has shown that, you know, for example, you think back to 1960s, 1950s USA, sit-ins or the bus boycotts, these were illegal actions. However, should they be illegal? No, because when you look at the consequences of it, they achieved the right to vote. They achieved the end of discrimination and segregation in the United States. Therefore, yes, it's how you view this. And I think he has it from a very consequentialist perspective, which I do like, actually. And I think there is, as he said there, I mean, Chomsky is a far smarter man than both of us. So I'm not surprised he came up with this, but it's very convincing when you think of something as being consequentialist in the sense that, is it illegal if it's achieved something so great? Well, no.
Yes, and before we end, I think we need a caveat as well that Chomsky is an anarchist. For those who don't know, anarchism isn't the sort of thing that it's mostly portrayed to be, which is this generalized chaos where everyone is going around killing people, looting shops, rioting. Anarchism, simply, in most intellectuals' minds, is this concept of having no state, having no powerful authority that can dictate what is right, what is wrong, what is acceptable, and what is not acceptable. So Chomsky, with being an anarchist, will definitely challenge this concept of power from the state a lot more. I think that's just an important thing for our listeners and viewers as well, because without understanding this concept of anarchism, it's really strange to look at Chomsky's beliefs.
And yes, if you do want to delve into the idea of anarchism, when you finish listening to the episode, about only a few months ago, Dejan, me and Lachlan had a discussion on anarchism. It's in probably our past season, but go check that out if you want to further delve into this idea. Yes. Anyway, just to recap the episode, today me and Dejan... Oh yeah, see you then. Oh,